Hi, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about, general media, virtual production. Second hour is something we usually want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we are happy to have Taylor Sunderhaus here. He's going to talk about audio live streaming with Icecast servers and how to put that actually together. So stay tuned for that. Tomorrow, we have understanding animation for non-animators. So we've had this a request a couple times, and basically what we're going to do is just talk about keyframes and interpolation and curves and those types of things. And so we'll talk about what that actually means and how to make that work. On Thursday, we have Richard Lavery has finished another symposium, and he's going to talk about how he did it, what it took to put that together. And then we're really excited to have on Friday, Michael Camus, who's going to also be here. He's expert in post in the cloud. And he is an expert in a lot of things, but he's going to be here joining us. It should be a lot of fun. And then Saturday, of course, we have education. But really what we're doing, we're going to have Q&A. And then at 8 o'clock, we're going to switch over and watch the Office Hours Space Launch, which should be a lot of fun. That's going to start at 8 o'clock. Launch is approximately 9, depending on weather and such. But we expect to have that there. And then, of course, Sunday is the more philosophical day where we talk about what we're doing here and ask the hard questions that need to be asked. So anyway, Sunday is the day to do that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Thanks, Alex. Our first one comes from Tim Mann in Melbourne, Australia. And Tim says, what needs to be considered when buying a lens for video recording?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, let me do it depends. It depends on your level of expertise and professionalism that you'll be working. If you're going to be working with a camera assistant, pulling focus, you want to get a lens that has external accessible focus with you can add a focus control to a manual focus with a little with a toothed connector on the outside so that you can pull focus. If you're a one-man band, you want to have a lens with internal focusing and that hopefully interfaces with your camera. If it's a DSLR, you want to have one that has the correct pinouts for connecting to your DSLR so that metadata from the lens and control of the lens can happen from the camera so you can remotely zoom and remotely focus the lens. You want to look for a lens that has if you want a shallow depth of field, if you want that bokeh to be sharp in a very narrow plane, you want to get the widest aperture lens you can find. So because the wider the aperture, the narrower your depth of field. And there are a number of other considerations considering whether, you're going to be mounting anything in the front, polarizers, things like that. So, and mounting matte boxes. There's a lot of things to consider when buying a lens for video recording.
Go ahead, Schy.
I specifically wanted to make sure I could shoot in low light because I was going to be going overseas into areas that were not able to get a lot of light, additional lights and things like that. So I wanted something with a really low f-stop to be able to also have a zoom so that I could be run and gun. It was all in the DSLR world. Now that we're working in more of the studio cameras with the Blackmagic, I really do appreciate the Sigma lenses that allow me to have a really nice art lens and feel.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So this has changed a lot because once upon a time, video cameras had video lenses and still cameras had still lenses, which were mostly interchangeable. They were not typically on the video cameras. But in the DSLR era, everything started coming together and changing. So it's more complicated, I think, now actually than it used to be. My suggestion would be you're buying not just a lens, but into a lens family and into a camera family in terms of the mount. So what most people do is you decide on what camera you're going to be shooting first. It is going to have a particular lens mount, and it's going to have particular characteristics like the size of the sensor. And you're going to be buying into that family of lenses. So the very first thing I do is just make sure there's a lot of robust choices for you in that family of lenses. So you'll hear people say, okay, I've switched from full frame to micro four thirds. That has to do with the chip size and the mount and the kind of class of camera. Once you're in that, you're going to start assembling your lenses based on what's available in that. So look deep in terms of what your camera allows, and then start building a series of lenses based on that.
Yeah, there are very few lenses that I buy that the aperture doesn't go down to 2.8. There's a handful of them, but that usually gives you a good sense of what the quality of the lens is. Now, remember that it won't be sharp necessarily all the way to 2.8. The sharpest point on a lens is generally around 5.6. You want to look at your mounts, as Bill said. The two that I almost all my camera systems work on is PL and Canon. Those are the most flexible, in my opinion, as far as mounts go. But there are a lot of other cameras. Micro Four Thirds is something that we use in some of the smaller cameras. The choice of lenses is much smaller, so we kind of work with that. As Courtney said, having gears on the outside is useful, but quality glass is something that costs money, and it starts at good quality glass starts in the upper hundreds and ends up in the upper nearly $100,000. So you just have to decide how hard you're going to push. Remember that you can always rent lenses as well. So buy the lenses that you need on a day-to-day basis, and then rent the ones that you need for a specific shoot. Next question.
Andre Dalla in Berlin is up next. He says, I asked a question a few weeks ago and want to find the very good answer again. I don't remember the day to rewatch. Is there an archive, and where can I search for questions asked by myself?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There is not an archive at this point in time. Will there be one in the future? We don't know yet. But the easiest way to do that is if you remember exactly how you worded the question, or just get the keywords for the question that you asked. You can actually go to the YouTube page. You can put it in the main search, but for a more detailed search on office hours, you go to the office hours global page, and then there's going to be a search. If you go just a little bit down from the page, you'll see a search icon. You hit that button, and then you'll start put those keywords in, and then it will search throughout the videos that we've done. Because I haven't changed, unless we run to the 5,000 character limit, I haven't changed the information on the questions. So if you put the question in exactly the way you put it in for the show, you should be able to find it.
Go ahead, Schy.
On Discord, you might check the chat links channel and do a search there to see if your name will show up, because we do historically scrape all of the Makana questions and put them over there throughout the day.
Yeah, and technically we do have our archive, which is on YouTube, the Office Hours Global YouTube channel. So we do have it there, but we don't have a searchable archive yet. We will have it in the future, but we're not there yet. Next question.
Comes from Tim Mann in Melbourne, Australia again. Is there a difference between lenses for video and lenses for photo?
Go ahead, Jason.
It's a great follow-up. The three things that I would say just straight away would be focus throw. So focus throw is the physical distance between that a focus ring needs to travel to move the focal point between the minimum and maximum amount in the lens. For a photo lens, that's small. For a video lens, it's large, but more importantly, it's very proportional. The iris, so for video lens, separate ring for iris, and then it spins smoothly and measured in T-stops and not F-stops. The last one would be parafocal versus varifocal. Parafocal means focus is held throughout the zoom range. Video lenses are, as far as I can tell, always parafocal, and then it has a hard stop at the very end of the focus ring. Varifocal means the focus changes throughout the zoom range, and there's a lot of overlap here. I think photo lenses have gotten a lot better, especially in that last little bit. But yeah, the difference also about, 500%.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the use case is a little different. And I used to explain it this way. Most still photographers are searching for and adjusting for a perfect moment. That's their goal. No matter what it looks like when I point my camera at something, I'm going to adjust things until I get it just right. Then I'm going to trigger the shutter. The video artist, on the other hand, is constantly looking to move. They're going to find a shot, an establishing shot or a start shot, and they may stay there, but they also understand that they may be panning or tilting or zooming in or something to create a story for the audience with that move or zoom. And I used to, in my lectures, talk about it as, a wide shot zoomed into a close shot is telling the audience, you're in this overall scene, this is what you should be looking at. And the opposite is true too. If you're starting with a close up and then you're pulling wide, you're saying, here's the object I want you to focus on. Now look at the context that object is in, or person. So they're two different forms of image making and creating, and they should be dealt with differently. And so those two different kinds of lenses are going to have different capabilities to allow you to do those kind of storytelling things.
Yeah, a lot of us use still lenses for our video, but there are some key mechanical differences, as Jason said. Being able to get the focus all the way through. Now that also means that the video lenses themselves have what we call a back focus ring, so that you can actually calibrate that camera so that, for the back focus to the chip. And then of course there's the gears that Courtney mentioned earlier that will give you the controls that you need for remote, so that you can do those soft in and outs. So those are the two big things, and of course T-stop versus f-stop, which was already mentioned as well. Next question.
Andre Dalla in Berlin says, I have an upcoming Zoom with several interpretations. For people with language disabilities, I need interpretation to Easy German as well. Is there a possibility to rename the interpreter languages in Zoom, or other suggestions?
Go ahead, Blue.
Yeah, actually, if you just go into your account settings, you log into Zoom and go down to settings and advanced in the meetings area, look for language interpretations. Next to or right above the listing of languages, you're going to see a little plus button. If you click on that, you can add any language you want, including Easy German. Just type it in and press OK. You'll be good to go.
And Klingon. You can do Klingon. Jonas?
Indeed.
Yeah, Blue hit it out of the park.
I really want someone to. I wonder if there's anybody who specializes in being a Klingon interpreter. It would be so cool. Like the ultimate thing would be
I
to
bet
have
there
like
are
a drop.
hundreds.
Oh my gosh, to have like English, German, French, Klingon, and then you have to have like Elven. Like and if you turned it on and it was actually that language, like someone actually interpreting into that language, pure gold. Pure gold. Like there's a stretch goal for us all. All right. Next question.
So hard to find Dorvish speakers. Carlos Ricconi in Rio de Janeiro. Hello. Any comments about Logic Pro 10.7.3's update that allows mixers to real-time monitoring through Apple's Spatial Render on headphones or even on speakers?
Go ahead, Jason.
I played with it very briefly between bouts of playing with universal control. Very, very cool, and much, much easier than it was.
Yeah, it's always been a little bit of a process to monitor what you're doing in spatial. And so I think that it's pretty exciting. And again, the advantage that we have with Apple there is that they're managing the entire pipeline all the way to the end user. And so that's going to help a lot as far as the kind of the moving spatial forward, because it's just part of what's kept spatial back is just the technical difficulties of making it actually work. Next question.
Alex Lindsay from Nevada, California, whoever that might be, says, I have a show coming up with 900 to 1,000 people in Zoom, and I want to be able to have paired sharing. How can this be achieved?
Go ahead, Blue.
So I think you're probably going to use the breakout functionality inside of Zoom. One downside is at most you can do 100 breakouts inside of Zoom. So you need to split up your audience. If you really want it to be paired sharing, you're going to need to be running somewhere between 4 and 5 meetings to get down to groups of 2. One thing I'll tell you, generally speaking, is what we find when we put people into breakouts, we get about 10 to 15% dropout. Much like in an in-person event, when people say turn to the person next to you and start talking and share something, and all of a sudden half the room has to go to the bathroom, the same thing happens virtually. So I wouldn't recommend, for a good experience, doing paired sharings. I would try to do 3 to 4s instead of 2s, unless this is a highly engaged audience and you feel really strongly that you're not going to wind up with breakouts of 1 as a result of doing pairs. So just keep that in mind.
Is there any way to do it where it sees that there's only 1 and then it recombines them, in the breakouts?
Yes, Zoom OSC.
There we go.
That you can. We had something written for us a while ago by Andy and the team that essentially was a what's the application that they use all the time.
Well, Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC and then Isadora.
Isadora, thank you. It was an Isadora application that essentially kept track of how many people were in rooms, and actually when we did it. We use the Isadora application to put people into rooms rather than Zoom's auto assign, because Zoom doesn't know how to do math for some reason. You say rooms of 3 to 4 and you wind up with some rooms with 2 and some rooms with 5. We've also played around with the possibility of using a reaction inside of Zoom to trigger putting people into breakouts with Zoom OSC. So when it comes time to do breakouts, you set up your breakouts through Isadora, and people raise their hand to be put into a breakout. So all that's possible with people who are far smarter than me, but that's the way to do it if you want to go that route.
Go ahead, Jonas.
I've done it in the past. That the main broadcast was just on a website, and everybody got their own meeting. And then, for example, you could jump through all those rooms with a Zoom room and bump it all up, or to make sure that everybody has the same level, or create all the meetings with the API and give the person that should have host rights, the start link and stuff like that. Or like Blue said, break it up and then find someone to push it into all of those.
That's great. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Matteo Mazzeri in Annecy, France. And he says, after the great hands-on of the GH6, has anyone tried the new Olympus System OM-1?
The OM-1 looks interesting, but I don't know anybody who has played with it yet. I might see if Scott Bourne is willing to jump on with the hands-on. I bet you he has it. So we'll take a look at that in the future. Next question.
Jason Bin in Toledo, Ohio is next. What are the people's thoughts on the new Apple Studio display, specs versus price?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, the 5K iMac was introduced 7 years ago, and it's been needing a twin monitor for a long, long time. I'm glad this is out now.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I think that's a good point. The other thing is I think there's just a little too many features on the new display. I'm not sure I need all those speakers because I've got much better speakers that are purpose-built to do what they do, and a camera. I mean, again, it's always a little bit of a compromise when it's built in.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I think it's absolutely worth what it costs. I've owned many Apple Cinema displays over the years, and I've yet to be disappointed by one. I am very intrigued by what they're going to do with the iPhone processor that just, happens to be camped out there. I'm guessing it has something to do with universal control and possibly more.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I like all the specs that I see in there. The camera, it would be nice if the camera had actually an ability to reposition without positioning the whole monitor. But the fact that it's doing the moving around as people move around on the screen is going to help in a lot of different things. The other thing was with that Bionic chip. The one thing that I've missed that we used to have that on the Windows phones and stuff like that, is that emulator and being able to put your phone right on the screen so you can see what's going on and who's texting you and things like that. I'd love to see this monitor have that ability to pair with your phone so you can actually see your phone without having to look over here or over here, put it on the charger in the other room and then see what's going on.
I mean, essentially, it is an Apple TV. Like it has the processing capacity to be an Apple TV. So it's going to be really interesting to see. You could theoretically play games, watch videos in a picture-in-picture, all those things without touching your computer. Bill, real quick.
Well, I was exactly going to make the point that you did. I was thinking Apple TV immediately because the second box is nowhere near as convenient as having the intelligence built into the screen.
Yeah, it's hard for me because I'm trying to route lots of videos into it. So it's probably not the right one for me, but I think that it's been really hard to find a monitor that really takes full advantage of a Mac or the Mac Minis or any of the other, or the Mac Pros. So I think Apple kind of had to come back into the market because the other manufacturers are not really producing something that does what it needs to do. Next question.
Jason Bin in Toledo, Ohio is back again with, has anyone ordered the new Mac Studio computer? And if so, what display or displays are you planning to use it with?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I have ordered it. I'm going to use the Studio display. Really looking forward to seeing how this performs. I was going to order a higher Mac Mini when it came out, but this is what they introduced, and we'll see how it works.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I'll be using it with any number of displays, definitely the aforementioned Apple Cinema display, as well as, what's it called? The LG monitor that does quad link that Guy likes, that lets you take the 4K and, allow you to divide it natively into quadrants. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Jason saying that that monitor is probably the one I would pair it up with. But I was so close. I almost hit the button to buy it, and then I thought, what's a few more months waiting for the new Mac Pro?
Yeah, I bought a lower end. I bought the Max, not the Ultra, because I plan to buy the Mac Pro, and so I want something with the that many Thunderbolts is really what I need. And I'm looking at the idea of building kind of a very compact kit that will let me do 4 Zoom ISOs out into an extreme with, like a couple, and really build something that's very compact that lets me have multiple speakers and so on and so forth. I think it can be a really interesting process. Next question.
Mason Cashin in Oregon City, Oregon says, I attended a conference on Virbela, aka Second Life for conferences. The ability to virtually run into friends, acquaintances, and have a conversation is unique and valuable. How would you most closely recreate this chance for serendipity in Zoom?
Blue?
I wouldn't. So
I didn't want to say it.
Yeah, I will. So this is a question that's very similar to what about the metaverse for virtual events? And, to me, first off, you kind of nailed the biggest problem with it, which is that it's Second Life. So it takes me back 15 years rather than taking me forward. Beyond that, the event experience itself, sure, it's cool that you can walk around and bump into people accidentally. That experience tends to get old really quick, and then you go there for what you went there to do, which is to watch content, and then you wind up with essentially a WebRTC frame on a fake stage that you then make full screen so that you can actually see it properly, and the whole experience goes away. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. I also really like the interactivity that Zoom Meeting gives you and the ability to actually see people, not this weird avatar that isn't actually that person. So I'm really not a fan of those particular tools. And inside of Zoom, I guess how I would create that serendipity is simply by using breakouts on a regular basis, using Zoom Meeting rather than Zoom Webinar so people can see each other and interact with each other easily. Those are the things that we use to make events like the one we're running this weekend for 27,000 people be really immersive experiences.
Yeah, for every, I guess, having worked as a consultant in many open offices where they talk about the serendipity and everything else, to me, for every moment that was special because someone just happened to walk by, there's 10 moments of someone interrupting me while I'm trying to get something done. So, so the thing is that I don't like, like I'm the kind of person that if you call me and didn't text me first to say, is this a good time? I usually, unless you're my mother or my wife or my kids, I will pick up the phone relatively irritated. Like it's, that's not really, I'm not really an open, like, hey, come by and talk. So, so I think that that's the problem is that a lot of people don't want that. Now, for me, when I look for serendipity, I go to after hours. That is to me great serendipity where I don't know what I'm going to get. It's a box of chocolates, and I'm going to open it up. And oftentimes I leave the speaker open all day, and I sometimes, okay, now I have to work. I turn the speaker off. I want to listen to what people are talking about. I sometimes then just jump in and say something and then disappear again. Or you say, Blue?
Well, I was going to say we actually do something similar to after hours for some of our events, where on our dashboards, which is essentially a portal into Zoom,
right,
we'll put a button for a lounge. And it's, in some cases, we've done stuff where you pop into the lounge and there's actually a DJ playing and they can, redirect you into different topics that are breakouts. You can select your own topics and go and have conversations.
Right.
We've done stuff where it's completely unmoderated and it's just literally you walk in there kind of like office hours and people are just chatting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done stuff where there's actual moderators where somebody is in there from the team who's, a conversation starter, essentially. They have like 5 questions that they ask people and just get them going. So that can be a way to do it for conferences without going through the kitschiness of taking you back 15 years.
Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes from Werner in Warsaw, Poland, and he says about best practices. I host tons of Zoom or Microsoft Teams training and finally mastered picture-in-picture with my ATEM. Is it okay to push ATEM output through the Zoom screen share? Are there any technical caveats I need to consider, like audio sync and so forth?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Werner, I'll take a shot at this since nobody's in the queue to answer it. It seems to me that if you're a 1080p in a enterprise or business class license, that there's not going to be any gain in quality. It's when you go below 720 that sharing tends to bump the resolution up.
Yeah, the main thing with screen share is that you can get up to 1080p with a screen share immediately. And the way I do that actually is I use QuickTime. So I send my ATEM to a QuickTime, and then I screen share my QuickTime video. Now you can optimize for video, but once you do that, you start getting the lower resolution again. So if you want 1080p, you're going to get a lower frame rate. So 1080, basically screen sharing is saying I choose resolution over frame rate. So if you're going to be talking a lot and moving a lot, people are going to notice it. If you're going to play any videos out, people are going to notice it. So those are things to kind of consider when you go into screen share. Regular video, your regular Zoom connection is already managing for video. So you're kind of set up. And if you have a 1080p account, you're not going to get a lot out of it. The one place where screen share really makes a difference is something like BlueJean. BlueJeans is a really, like, if you cut to yourself, you'll stay as a little window down below. And most people in BlueJeans don't know how to pin it. It can be done, but they don't know how to do that. It's just not part of that culture. So, and if for Teams, I wouldn't be able to tell you for the last week, I haven't been able to get into Teams. It crashes every time I get introduced to one. So they're going through a storm. So I don't know how to do that one. But recently, BlueJeans, I do a fair bit, and I have to use screen share through the QuickTime, through the ATEM to actually get it in there in a place that people can actually watch it. But Zoom is relatively easy to do that. Next question.
Vincent Gerard in Louisiana is asking the biggest question we're going to face today. How is John Preto coping with his house guests?
Go ahead, John.
Keenan's great, Schy's great, but that Fenwick guy, although he was wearing that Charley Brown shirt, he's like Lucy. He pulls the ball away from you when you're going to kick the ball.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Hey, Preto, isn't having guests sort of like having fish? After about 3 days, it's best to get rid of them.
Next question.
Next one comes from our friend Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Can the panel describe the use of Vmix Call? And there may be a use on conversation with Tony Mobley, he's wondering.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Vmix Call is Vmix's own WebRTC-based remote contribution platform that they built. I know that you have some issues with Video Ninja right now, but for some reason, you might run into the same issues with Vmix Call as it's based on similar technologies. I would say for conversations with Tony Mobley, it might be better to go back to a Zoom workflow now that you have less participants. But Vmix Call can work. But you need to have the advanced link, and then you have all the pains of using a WebRTC platform that you need to select the correct link, select the correct audio device, and it has less features than Video Ninja or something like that.
Go ahead, George.
So Jonas covered most of it. You're kind of asking folks to commit to using something else outside of what we've kind of been moving towards, which is Zoom, either Zoom Rooms or ISO. So Vmix Call is great, but again, it's just asking folks to move to a different workflow, or even for yourself, move into a different workflow.
Yeah, I have to admit that I look at Vmix Call as a thing that's very much like Zoom, except that most users don't know how to use it, and it doesn't have the scale or stability that Zoom has. So that's my view of pretty much all of them. Is just is there, Jonas, I guess, is there any real advantage to Vmix Call over Zoom?
Hey, it's built into Vmix. That's probably the only advantage. We are so happy with our Zoom Rooms, NDI, and Vmix in the cloud that we haven't looked into anything else. And last time I checked, it also was pretty hard to get 1080p video over Vmix Call, so that might be an issue as well.
Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes from Sebastian Mantha in Ottawa, Canada. And Sebastian says, I've seen lots of discussion in office hours about many common microphones. And he notes the Heil PR-40, the Shure MV7, the SM7B, and so forth. But I wonder if the panel has any thoughts on the inexpensive Rode PodMic that I noticed Liberty White using yesterday.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, there's nothing at all wrong with it. It sounds fine. It's just that the Heil and the Shure mic happens to be the one that most of us end up using, and there are subjective differences in the quality of the sound. But the the Rode is a perfectly serviceable microphone for what you want to do.
Go ahead, Bill.
Like others here, I've been doing radio and or announcing and or voiceover work for probably 50 years now. And so here's my 2 cents on microphones. When you're beginning, most of them work pretty much the same for you. And there's thousands of different microphones that'll do a very competent job of taking your voice and putting it out onto a system. So you say, why do we tend to migrate to specific mics? And I would say it's a little bit like professional runners or long distance runners and their shoes, which is that when you're starting to run, you're not very good at it, and you can actually wear pretty much any shoes that'll give you some support and go through those early short training things, and it's not a big problem. But as you get to be more and more professional, what you want to do is eliminate tiny problems or tiny issues. And the mics that come around for voiceovers are mics that have proved over the course of time that they have a quality that eliminates little tiny problems. I've said a couple of times that in my voice booth, I use a Neumann TLM-103 because it's an extremely sensitive microphone, but that's a controlled space, and I don't have to worry about the fact that it'll pick up a computer fan at my desk. Here, I'm using a Sennheiser MKH416, which is notable for being a mic that gives you a little bit more vocal attack and a little more sharpness. And so when you get really good at these things, you end up looking for these little specific things that help you as a professional get the mic out of your head and just perform.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think this is Rode's reaction to the market. They designed it as a end-address cardioid to compete with the Shure and the Heils. It's a large diaphragm dynamic, and it sounds quite good. I like the sound of it on Liberty's voice, and I think, as Bill said, a lot of times you want to find a mic that sounds good with your particular voice. And you can't just look at the specs. You have to actually listen to how the mic performs, because some of them will be a little peakier in the upper mid-range, and some will be a little beefier in the low end. And if you're a man or a woman, that makes a big difference in how you're going to come across. So try it out and see if you like it. It seems to have good noise reduction. It seems to be well built, has internal pop filter. So I think it's a pretty good microphone, and Rode does build some pretty good microphones.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. I think that Liberty also has an MV7, so it'd be interesting for you to ask on Monday when she's on why she made it switched from one to the other, because I think she's making that decision. I mean, Liberty's voice is so good that she can probably have any mic, it'll sound good. so anyway, so I think that so she's she can wear any mic she wants. So I think but it'll be interesting to see why she made the decision. Next question.
Looks like Frojon Banwell, in San Diego, California, says Raspberry Shake 4D gathered important data last year around the earthquake in Hawaii, and he's got a link there. Wondering if RPis are being used in the upcoming rocketry event ArsTechnica posted about Haiti in 312.
I don't know. I'm going to throw the ball right at John. Are any Raspberry Pis in the mix for what you're doing, Mr. Preto? No, he's not responding.
He must not have his headphones.
All right. I don't think we're using any of them. I think it's a really interesting way to use a Raspberry Pi. So,
what was the question? I'm sorry, guys.
You're running a loop. You're running a loop on us.
Yeah.
So anyway, the question is, are any Raspberry Pis involved in the launch?
No, there's dedicated flight computers. They're more advanced than a Raspberry Pi. The flight computer that we have has it's got barometric pressure. It's got an accelerometer in it. It's got telemetry. It's got GPS. It's got about 8 different sensors in it. It's a little teeny package, but most importantly, it dries the ejection charges. So there's 8 outputs on this little teeny board that drive into an E-match into a little well of black powder, and that blows out the parachutes. And so they're very, very sophisticated. The flight computer is about $500 for the main flight computer, and the backup is about $100 and change. So they're specifically designed for rocketry, because you've got issues with Raspberry Pi. If it goes Mach speed, you'll have issues with it.
Oh, interesting. Jeffrey, real quick.
I just wanted to say that on the OH Space YouTube page, John has been posting videos on the build, so you can see everything that's been happening there. That's
great. Next question.
Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania. Up next is next week the 2nd anniversary of Office Hours. I want to make sure I'm here for it.
It is. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yep, Friday, March 25th. It's going to be episode 731. You'll be here. Don't miss it. And of course, we'll have everything that you can kind of set yourself a reminder for that Friday.
Next question.
Next one comes from Joel in Mumbai, India. Has anyone tried the new Telegram Live? For some reason, it doesn't work with channels, but for groups, it works just fine. Has anyone been lucky with channels? He wonders.
I haven't used Telegram in a long time. I was excited about it when it came out. The pictures, all the little pictures that you can put in, they have a huge library, which I thought was really fun. But I haven't used it recently. It doesn't. I think for me, it just didn't provide enough security differentiation from Signal to make it worth adding yet another set of messages to my system. And I didn't have a lot of people that used it. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia, in the U.S. says, "What is the camera Schy is using this morning? And is he in a new studio? You look great."
Go ahead, Tony.
I apologize for asking the question, Schy. I didn't realize that you were at John's house. And so that's when I saw you and you looked so good, I put the question in.
Go ahead, Schy. What are you using? Nope, can't hear you, Schy.
As I noticed, we're in a different studio, and I'm still finding where John hid the buttons. But yes, as a compare and contrast, it is critical to note, yes, I started on a Mac with a little built-in camera. Then we moved to the Brio, is what you normally see me in my studio with a single ring light. And this is a Sony A7 III with a Sony lens. And again, we've got two large light panels overhead, a hair light back behind, and then he's got some very nice accent lights, and then the sun's coming up. If that's the most anomaly that I've got, is the sun coming up, because that's a new thing for me.
Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Up next, Alex, can you share a link to your heart demonstration example?
Go ahead, Tony.
This was something we talked about on Saturday, and there was several attendees on Saturday that asked for the link for it, Alex. I didn't want to ignore their requests.
Yep. I can't find it. Can't find the one that I used to use as an example, but this is the one that I found here while I was looking for that. And this is human.biodigital.com. And it's pretty slick. You can actually, if I grab in here, I can rotate this around. Now the performance is not great because I'm doing so much on the computer, but you can turn a lot of different things, on and off. I don't know if I turned something off that you can see, but you can see how I can start turning pieces of the heart off, and you can start to see things here. And then in my system, so it's not beating. The one that I showed before was beating, and I can't find that one, but you can sit there and talk about things. So what we were talking about is the ability to do things like that, where I can, if I have a telestrator and this, and you can see how for a teacher, this would be, if you're doing a medical, you're talking about the heart, and you can say, okay, well, this is the ventricles, and you have it zoom in here, and I can, start to talk about what this is and how this works and so on and so forth. And that to me is, starting to point towards a different kind of future, for education, that we just have to keep moving forward. And when we talk about this is way easier to do seated in a control system like I have with lots of monitors and Wacom tablets and things than it is to do in front of a classroom. So that's why I keep on saying that the future for a lot of teachers may be something where they can kind of have a control space and really have a fully operational one, as opposed to doing it standing in front of a bunch of people in real space, meat space, as we used to call it, is really inefficient. Next question.
Steve Buchan of Vancouver, Canada, remoting my inbound Mac studio via the Corning Thunderbolt 49-foot optical to OWV, but I think it's OWC 4-port Thunderbolt hub with two Apple Studio displays off the hub. Any problems or challenges using Thunderbolt over Optical?
Go ahead, Jason.
I've never used anything quite that long, but I did a little bit of searching. OWC did these torture tests with Optical Thunderbolt. What they found was for sustained data transfer, nothing for video, but for sustained data transfer, there is an 8% difference in the overall performance when there's a really fast SSD on the other side and they're pushing really big files. I have no idea how that will translate to video.
Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis says, what bands have the most compelling lighting design in their concerts? What specifically sets those apart?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Oh, Iron Butterfly. They had an overhead projector with a pan with oil and water and color liquids, and they used to jump it up and down. That was the coolest light show I ever saw, and it's not DMX compatible.
Go ahead, George.
I'm a big fan of U2, and their lighting, which is done by PRG, is massive. Dennis is showing a little bit of it right now, but I saw them in DC. But if you take a look at them on YouTube, you'll see their lighting setup is massive.
And go ahead, Bill.
My standard was I got to see the Dark Side of the Moon tour with Pink Floyd in the early days, which was astonishing, and it really was a life-changing moment. But if I'm looking back at the ones that I think in the modern era have been the most impressive, I saw Sade some years ago in an arena kind of circumstance, and it was the most stripped down and beautiful thing that I think I have ever seen in a concert space. There was literally nothing on stage, nothing, not an amp, not a rack, not anything, just the performers. And then they used scrims pulled down that their huge Barco projectors were managing to turn into any world that she wanted. It was brilliantly animated. And that performance to me was just stunning. So it reminded me that with really good design, less can truly be more, because you can project anything. And when you really get these scrims and these projectors working together, you can make fantasy worlds that are unbelievable.
Go ahead, Schy. You there, Schy?
Absolutely agree with the U2 concert experience that I received in the stadium in Seattle, but I'm also impressed by the Trans-Siberian Orchestra that were in an indoor stadium, and they involved the entire stadium, entire experience, and they would bring people out in. So the lighting was not just in front, but of course all the atmosphere they would have to create to give the something for the light to bounce off of. So there's another opportunity for you.
Go ahead, Jason.
I've seen and photographed and been on stage for easily 1,000 electronic dance shows. Deadmau5 has the most insane rig I've ever seen anywhere. It's absolutely over the top.
Go ahead, Courtney.
The most amazing one I've seen that I actually worked on was a Blue Oyster Cult concert back in the 70s. And they had a water-cooled laser backstage and fiber optics that ran out onto the stage and up the pants of the lead guitarist and to an amulet on his wrist. And at a certain point, he would point at this mirror ball hanging above the audience, and a green laser would fly out of his wrist and hit that mirrored ball and blind thousands of people in the audience. And it's since been outlawed by OSHA.
That can't be legal.
Oh my gosh. It was then, but it's not anymore. I think that one of the things that I find fascinating is the wristbands. So they've started to give wristbands out to fans as they come in. It's not the same as the lighting show, but it is a lighting show. It is these glowing wristbands, and at certain times they get turned on. They're all, kind of enabled, to turn on, and suddenly the fans all start doing things, and they can actually, if the fans stay in their seats where they were supposed to be, they can, do animations across them, and so on and so forth. That people just hold up their wrist. So it's kind of a cool thing. They're, in case you're wondering, if you're looking for any inside baseball, out of your $500 ticket or $300 ticket, the wristbands cost $8. That's a pretty expensive thing to hand to every person, but that's what goes into out of your ticket price. But $8 a wristband. Next question.
The seventh scroll in Brooklyn's up next. We've been using the Shure QLX wireless mics going into an X32 for our streams, and every so often I'm noticing distortion and even cutouts, even though we are pretty close to the receiver. What's the issue here? And also any suggestions or recommendations?
All right, go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, the issue is wireless, and if you're using it in Brooklyn, where you seem to be from, you better run a spectrum analyzing test to determine what frequencies are available, because New York is probably the busiest wireless channel frequencies availability anywhere in the world. So there's a chance that what will work right now may not work 5 minutes from now, and it's just the nature of the beast.
The thing that I would look at first when I hear distortion in wireless, I usually think of gain. So, the gain staging across it. So the transmitter has a certain gain to it. The receiver has a certain gain to it. And if those things aren't set properly, you will get distortion. And what will happen is that the telltale sign is that it's not very loud in the mix, but it's distorted. That means that there's in either the transmitter or the receiver, there's a mismatched gain. So this is where you have to kind of really figure out your gain stage, and it will cut out if you go way over. So that's my guess is that what you're actually dealing with is a gain stage problem. But Mitchell's right. It's a very complicated thing. If you don't have some spectrum analyzer, and you can get RF Scout or something like that to just see what's going on. But if you don't have a spectrum analyzer, change the channels, and test it some more. Just keep changing the channels, because especially if you're using the channel that it came with, this is the big mistake people make with Sennheisers, the GL series, is that, or the G, the G series on the Shures, is that they all just turn them on and start using them, and that means that everybody is on the same frequency. So, move the frequency around a little bit and see if it helps. Next question.
Joel in Mumbai, India says, is there a close competition to Zoom? With the flexibility that it offers, WebEx is extremely unfriendly. Any other solution which gets as close as Zoom?
Go ahead, Jason.
I don't think so. Blue, of course, is coming next, so I'll defer to the master.
Go ahead, Blue. Oh, can't hear you, Blue. Oh, still.
That's entertaining. The Zoom master who can't actually use Zoom. Sorry about that. No. And I think the big advantage, and we all recognize this, that Zoom has is 350 million daily active users. If you're trying to do a conference or do something on Zoom or on a platform, there's no other platform that's being used as much as Zoom, and they have an amazing infrastructure.
Yeah. I feel like at first I really felt like Teams was catching up. And now I think that Zoom is starting to pull away again. I think Zoom focused effectively on some of the things that they need to work on. And again, we may overtalk this, but the fact that Zoom brought in liminal, I look at the long-term trajectory and just go, I don't know how someone keeps up with that kind of team having if liminal continues to have a meaningful impact on the direction of Zoom. I think it's very hard. People think that employees are, like people on the outside, not people on the inside of a corporation, but people on the outside of a corporation think that people are expendable. Like you can just replace that person. Why do you pay that person so much? Or why do CEOs get paid that much? Or lead engineers or certain managers or whatever get paid a lot to keep them? Well, it's because it turns out that there's sometimes just people that make something happen, and so in any company, I can usually, like companies that I've worked in the past, I can usually tell you there's like 20 people that if they all left at one time, the company would fold. It could have 100,000 people, and I think some of the technology leadership at the very top, all the way through a lot of the event planning and event infrastructure, Zoom has picked the right people, and I think that has a huge impact on their competitiveness. I think that Teams is probably the second, with kind of Google in a distant third, and then you have Blue Jeans, which is probably kind of close to Google in my opinion. I use all of these all day, and GoToMeeting and WebEx I think are done. Like they're like the old guard. They'd have to literally rewrite from scratch, and Chime is a punishment. Go ahead, Taylor.
I would just say Zoom also is taking the time to recognize what people are using the platform for. The acquisition of liminal, Zoom events, all this different type of stuff. They're spending a lot of time. I agree with you on that. But the other thing I would point out too is I would also say it comes down to what are you using it for and what is your budget. Zoom might be the top of the line, but maybe Zoom is out of your budget, or maybe for some reason Zoom is unavailable to you. So that's something I would think about when you're thinking about which one you're going to pick, your use case, because sometimes your use case might change things a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's actually the thing that Zoom has done probably better than anyone else is it starts at zero as far as how much it costs you and goes up to, really complex things for not a ton of money. I don't know any other platform right now from a price perspective that's also competitive with Zoom. I think there's key things. The the easy entry that Zoom has, the support, the API supports that people can take advantage of, the grid view that where you can move people around. Oh my gosh. Anyway, and then little things like the gallery view, not in the gallery view, but in the speaker view, the film strips at the top. Almost everybody else puts it at the bottom, which is super annoying because it pulls everybody's eye down, instead of up. It's like little things like that Zoom has done right and everybody else has done wrong. Next question.
Todd Davis in Hutchinson, Kansas, asking the big question for today. Can Fenwick talk about the genesis of the Charley Brown shirt?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Really? Is this like the most important, compelling thing with all these great questions?
Yes, it is.
We don't define things as being the most important. We just have things that we do. All right, go ahead,
I know
John.
I'm going to regret listening.
You can see Chris is out in the garage with Keenan, and they're organizing for a rocket shoot.
There you go. And go ahead, Schy.
I asked Chris, and he said, "Doesn't everybody have one?" So I guess there's your origin.
There you go. Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland is up next. Facebook auto-generated captions. How can I turn them off at the upload stage, or are they client only? Thanks.
Good, Jeffrey.
There's two ways to do this. First one is if you're creating the video. The other way is in general, in the settings page. There's a general tab, and then you'll see a little box that says auto generated video captions, and that's where you'll turn that off. If you want to do individual videos, you can just go into the Creator Studio and then click the single video and select which one you want to turn the captions off for.
Next question.
James Bin asks from Toledo, what are the main differences between a Raspberry Pi and an Arduino?
Go ahead, John.
I have them both. The Arduino is basically a microcontroller, and the Raspberry Pi is a full-blown computer running a form of Linux on it. So it's a full-blown computer with all of the general I/O that a computer has. And then the Arduino is designed to do like tally lights, like our Saturday lab.
Yeah, and you'll find that the latency. The latency is a lot lower on the Arduino than it is on the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi is going to let you do much more complex operations, but you wouldn't necessarily want. I don't think anybody's. Maybe I could be wrong, but I don't think most people are running drones and so on and so forth on Raspberry Pis, but they do on Arduinos because the Arduino has to react much faster. So it's going to do low-level things much faster than the Raspberry Pi. Next question.
Kenneth Jones, Seattle, Washington. How many external HDMI 1080 displays can I successfully add to an Intel MacBook Pro? What happens when I add one more?
Go ahead, Jason.
Now it's my turn to say it depends. It really just depends on which MacBook Pro and whether or not you're using an eGPU. That is an easy way, by the way, to cheat and to get a little bit more output. But the real question is, how many do you really need? Because you will start to see a performance hit pretty quickly.
Go ahead, Jason. I'm sorry, next question. Sorry.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia says, how many panelists are using the iPhone 13 Pro Max who is waiting for the 14?
Go ahead, Jason.
I have the 13 Pro, not the Pro Max. I tend to buy just about every iPhone because I don't know, I'm a sucker and it's a business expense.
Go ahead, John.
I've had every iPhone since the very beginning. I've got all the boxes sitting on the shelf. Chris actually rated my box collection today. And yes, I get the new iPhone every year. I'm one of those crazy guys.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I've been doing every other year, even though I've been starting to think I need to do an every year unbox and all that other stuff, video with all the rest of them. So I'll be getting the iPhone 14 or 13 SS or whatever it's going to be called next.
I get them every year. They kind of float down to either being cameras for me or they, like my 13 will most likely go to my wife when I buy the 14. So that's because she's like we now, the camera is so much different than hers. She is a couple of years old. That if we're together, she goes, "Oh, you just take the picture. I need you to take the picture. I need you to take this picture for me," because the camera has in the last 2 years, revisions has gotten so much better so fast. Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington says, I was watching The Assassin's Bodyguard last night. At 1 hour, 13 minutes, the Wilhelm Scream shows up. Is it really in every possible movie?
Go ahead, Schy.
It's not in every possible movie. It just means that your ear is now attuned to something you cannot ever unhear. So it's an homage. It's an Easter egg. It's just a fun thing.
It is definitely a sound designer Easter egg. I mean, we definitely, they look for somewhere to put it in. It is, I believe, in every movie that Ben Burtt has worked on. So I think that literally every TV show, everything, even in Wall-E, I think it's somewhere in there where that you hear it. And so he finds a place to hide that scream. It's a pretty funny thing. So I think for sound designers, they just love throwing it in somewhere. It's as Schy said, it's an homage. Let's go to the next question.
George E. Kennedy Jr., Washington, D.C. here on the panel says, Alex and office folks that wear glasses, how are you avoiding the dreaded shadows that your glasses hinges cast?
No, go ahead, George.
So to get to office hours is just keep pushing the limits, and I have like uplights here like 46 inches away from me, but I figured out now last night to shoot from the sides to be able to get rid of those hinges. But obviously now I have to use 4 fixtures. I'm trying to figure out what other folks are using. I know, Alex, you don't really see your hinges, that shadow. So I'm trying to figure out what other folks are doing to get rid of that shadow.
Yeah, really large sources. So my lighting area, I have 3 Nanlite 100Bs. And so it's I think it's 24 by about 50 or 60 inches. Like it's a big panel up there. So as you soften the light, you end up with more indirect light, and it's a bigger source. And so it gets rid of all of the hard shadows. And so the larger your light source gets, the less individual shadows you'll get. So the penumbra gets so big that it just disappears. So that's the key is the larger the light sources, the more we get rid of it. Go ahead, George.
So you've got lights going all the way across, not just shooting off to the side.
Yeah, it's like a huge panel of light, here. And I would make it bigger, but it would make it harder to do other things. Like when we do models, a lot of times our lights can be as much as like 3 feet or 4 feet by 4 feet, or there'll be a big diffuser, and then we're going to push light into that diffuser and have it be these big soft lights. So that's a very common thing to do, for this type of thing. For me, you can't make it big enough. The best one is go outside and in a cloudy day, and then you have the biggest diffuser ever. Go ahead, Tony.
Yes, I have 3 lights. I have one here, and one there. They are GVMs 802s, and that's how I deal with it.
Next question.
Tony Mobley is up next from Noonan, Georgia. I know that most of us are moving towards cloud switching, but are there still use cases for the ATEM Mini? And is there time for some training in after hours?
I go ahead, George.
Tony, there will always be a use for ATEM Mini. Right now, I have one of them hooked up to my teleprompter, and I could push any source into it. At that point, they just become headless on a Stream Deck, and that's how I use them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of uses for it. I mean, I have 2, that I use on a regular basis that are connected, and I use it in every meeting. And the advantage of having hardware on the outside is because I use this in every meeting. Oh, you're in Teams. Oh, you're in Blue Jeans. Oh, you're in whatever. Doesn't matter to me because I'm not using it just for building a show. I'm using it on a day-to-day basis just to be in meetings. And it is, again, having a switcher set up like that I can draw on and so on and so forth. It's ninja. You're able to definitely sell your ideas in a much more effective way. Anybody that's a salesperson or a manager or someone that wants to actually move ideas forward that doesn't have an ATEM Mini is nuts. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I have 2 ATEM Minis and an SDI based switcher, and I use them all.
Yeah, we can definitely do some more. We'll work on. Maybe what we'll do is that can be another one of the labs. Let's put that into the second hour suggestions, because education is now, this is for everybody who hasn't heard, education is going to have a tech hour right after the first hour, starting after the week after the launch. And so, we're going to talk more about Keynote, but we also could talk about, video, and in one of those have kind of an ATEM lab and talk about how it's used from an educator's perspective. Next question.
Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, using a tiny Lenovo P350 PC to send graphics to 3 large TVs, mini DP to HDMI to Ethernet back to HDMI. We're getting picture to 2 TVs and not the third. Should we switch to SDI or switch to a different computer?
I'll go with Jason.
First things first, completely simplify and strip down your signal flow and make sure you have the same issue. After that, any of that can work. Also, if you're not sending 3 different outputs, don't use your video card to duplicate. If it's the same graphics, go to something where you can just simply multiply it and don't make the computer do the work.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as Jason was saying, a distribution amp is really what you need if you want the same graphics on all 3. And you could convert to SDI coming out of that computer and then go to an SDI distribution amp, send SDI to each one, and then a little $30 or $40 box at each HDMI input will convert that SDI back to HDMI, and you should be good up to about 300 feet. Depends on how far apart these monitors are. SDI can travel easily over up to and over 300 feet without a problem.
Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles says the Apple presentation of new and updated products look great. Is there anything PC users in this industry should be looking forward to, or should we entertain the possibility of getting a Mac?
Go ahead, John.
I grew up as a PC guy, and about 15 years ago I switched to Mac, but I believe have one of everything. I've got PC, Mac, and Linux boxes here all on my desk.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So Intel just put out their 12th generation Core series of processors. That just came out. AMD's going, their Ryzen 7, I believe, is April 20th for their updates from there. And of course, it really depends because it's really dependent on the manufacturer and if they have the ability to make the chips and stuff like that. As for Windows, they put out Windows 11 last year, and they're just continuing forward with that.
I think if you're a visual media artist, you're going to have a hard time with the next couple of years if you're on a PC. Just watching what's about to happen. The amount of processing that Apple's putting in, especially for media, is stunning. And we should probably, it's going to be very difficult to watch. Next question.
Todd Rains, Allen, Texas. Is there a video camera, small DSLR cam rig for overhead that can move around a 6-foot diameter circle? Think about moving the camera around my lathe.
Go ahead, Schy.
Yes, I'm going to ask Jeffrey Powers to remind me of where that $170 C-stand was. That's about the best solid C-stand. And then about, again, $175 for the Manfrotto Magic Arm. That will give you the most flexibility and agility and stability. So many abilities.
If you're trying to rotate it around, one of the things to think about is instead of putting a rig there, you can actually essentially, if you have your whatever you're going to be showing here and you're standing here, you can put basically a pivot here and then hang it out like this, and you can swing it around. And this is what Leo does in his studio. He's got an arm that sticks out that is that's suspended right over top of the middle of the table, and he can swing his that camera that he has around. It's kind of what we tend to call an inverse jib. So it's just hanging from, you build it. If only you had some construction capabilities, Todd. Oh, wait. So anyway, this is all homemade. I don't know anyone that makes it, but you can actually then hang it out, put the camera here, and now you can swing it to anywhere you want. We've actually had ones where Leo doesn't have this, and then you put some counterweight here, by the way. Leo doesn't do this, but we put motors on these, and that way you can actually, if you use a stepper motor as opposed to a servo motor, you can define very specific locations, and so you can say, I want to swing. Just make sure it doesn't hit you while it's doing it, but it'll swing that camera around, and the stepper motor will be accurate as opposed to fast, and you don't need fast. So I would look at stepper motors with a motor with an arm sticking out like that with a counterweight. All right, ran just a little over there. Sorry about that, and we are now changing subjects to audio streaming. Now, people are like, well, there's video streaming. Why are we doing audio streaming? Well, there's a lot of people in discussion that like this that listen to us even. They listen to it on YouTube. They listen to it but more importantly, they listen to it in Mukana, and that's being streamed audio only. So we don't have to deal with the video. It's being streamed via Icecast server. And the person who helped put together the Icecast server is Taylor Sunderhaus. Hi, Taylor.
Hi, Alex. Thank you. I appreciate you having me. So the other thing I want to point out is a lot of times audio only is used for a person who has access to low bandwidth, who maybe don't have enough bandwidth to get the video, and they want to enjoy a lovely program like Office Hours. And then, maybe you want to listen to Office Hours on your headphones while you're taking a jog. This is another place where the stream would come into play. So Icecast is one out of two commonly used streaming servers.
What's the other one?
Shoutcast.
Okay, but Shoutcast is a service, right?
Or
does it have its own?
No, it does have its own. You can install it on Linux, like I'm going to demonstrate here, and connect things to it. I don't like it, honestly, from a personal opinion. It's too clunky. Especially when you're trying to do multiple streams on the same server, you have to. Shoutcast forces you to predefine everything, which becomes cumbersome. Icecast is a little more flexible, especially if you have to add or remove things on the fly.
And tell us a little bit about how the Icecast server works.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So the way the Icecast server works is it can be installed on Windows or Linux. Those are the two.
And which one do you usually install it on?
I normally put it on Linux simply because when I install this, I'm installing it on a lightweight machine or a lightweight virtual machine. I'm not. Icecast itself is not utility intensive or machine intensive. It doesn't require a whole lot of resources. So I use Linux primarily because I don't have to worry about the minimum specs that Windows would require.
Right.
I can use Linux.
And what's a typical hardware that you might use for this?
Typical hardware I would use for this would be a Raspberry Pi.
Wow. So you really don't need any processing power at all.
No, not at all. So that's physical hardware. Me personally, most commonly, I run this in the cloud. I mean, you could run this on a free instance of in AWS, as an example.
Well, doesn't it cost you something to actually stream it, or is it?
So the instance to run itself is free, but what you would be paying for would be the usage of the bandwidth.
And because it's audio, the bandwidth is very low.
Because of audio, typically the bandwidth is very low, but as you so the bandwidth uses varies between quality and timing. The higher the bit rate you typically get on a stream typically is more closer to real time. And then you also, the quality also, it's not a large effect, but it does take effect on the bandwidth as well. I will tell you, I have a station that I run audio on a stream. I run 128 kilobits per second at MP3 format, and bandwidth cost, I'm maybe spending $100, couple $100 a year, if that.
Wow. Yeah. So it's cheap.
Yeah, and to be fully transparent, it's a low power community station. So I don't have large numbers like the big guys do, but it's relatively not expensive at all. So what I'm going to show you today is kind of the basics on how to get started with this, and then in a future date, or you can catch me in after hours, I can get more specific. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just showing you how to set it up. I'm not really going into details on how we set it up for office hours. I'm just sticking to more general.
And what we'll do is for those of you watching, Taylor's going to walk through this, throw your questions into Mukana, and then Taylor we'll do a lab with Taylor where we all get to build our own Icecast server in the future. So we may not cover it at the detail necessary for you to do it, but Taylor will walk you through all the steps. Let's go ahead, Taylor, take it away.
So for the purpose of this demo, for the backend team, you can go ahead and put my screen up. For the purpose of this demo, I am using Linode. I'm not necessarily endorsing Linode.
What is Linode?
Linode is one out of many cloud service providers similar to AWS. So Linode, DigitalOcean, Vultr, there are many different cloud service providers. I'm using Linode in this case because I don't have to worry about revealing a whole bunch of personal information compared to if I use my AWS account. I have multiple servers on there. So from a security perspective, I'm using Linode because I don't have anything on it. And
Right.
It's easy for me to show you. Now, I will tell you also, as I go through this, I do understand, for those of you who are very security conscious, that I am revealing passwords and IP addresses. Just note, don't try anything funny. At the end of this show, the server will be destroyed. So, no need to try anything funny. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm in my Linode account here, and I'm going to create, I'm going to click create, and then create Linode, which is in other words, create a virtual machine. And when I'm creating the virtual machine, specifically in the cloud, what I'm doing is the first option I have, I'm selecting the operating system that I want to put on this machine. And the one I'm going to use for this example is Ubuntu. I'm going to use the latest version of Ubuntu. The next option I'm selecting is the region. This is essentially saying, what data center do I want to put it in? Do I want to put it in Atlanta, Dallas, Texas, California, New Jersey? Do I want to put it in Canada? Do I want to put it over in the UK? It's recommended that you put it closer to where your listeners are going to be. So if your listeners are primarily going to be listening in your area, then put it closest to you. Or at the very minimum, put it in a region that's more centrally located to all your listeners. So if you're doing nationwide, for example, and you're only running one server and you're not linking a whole bunch of servers together, which is possible to do, maybe put it more of a central region. So for the US, I might want to put it in Dallas, Texas, if I know I'm having listeners connect in from multiple areas of the country. Now, if I want to do something just close, local, I'm in Cincinnati, where I'm going to put it is Newark, New Jersey, and that's on the East Coast, and I get a little bit better of a response from it that way. So for this
is
example,
just removing the number of hops that it's going to take to get to that server, right?
Pretty much, yes. Mm-hmm. And honestly, if you think about it, where I'm at in Cincinnati, if you look at a map, it might be a toss-up between Dallas, Texas, and Newark, New Jersey. But for this example, I'm going Newark, New Jersey. I'll be honest with you, I have a family member who lives in Jersey over there, so I kind of have a little bit of bias for that too. So for this example, I'm going to select New York, New Jersey. The next thing you're going to select is you have all these different types of machines you can select. Dedicated CPU. You basically have a fully dedicated machine. It's a physical dedicated machine just for you. Shared CPU. You're essentially creating a virtual machine on a machine with others who also have virtual machines on that physical box as well. High memory. Once again, you're being put on a box that has a large amount of memory available to you, and then high GPU, you're also putting.
And so for something like this with a Raspberry Pi, you really only need like the lowest one that you can possibly get, right?
Yes, which would be a shared CPU. So
right.
In this case, I'm looking at $5 a month.
Right.
Now, that's just for the machine itself. That's just for the machine itself and 1 terabyte of bandwidth. So as long as you're not exceeding a terabyte worth of bandwidth with audio,
that's a lot.
It's a lot. You shouldn't be anywhere near that, to be honest.
Right.
This right here is a label. You can label it whatever you want. I'm just going to put streaming. This is a tag. The tags are a fancy way to where you can create tags so certain resources get connected to it once you build the machine. But details on that for another day. We're not going to use them in this example. The root password, obviously for those who might be Linux savvy, you have the option to log into a Linux machine via a password. But when you're SSHing into it or you're remoting into it via SSH, you can do via password or SSH key. For this example, I'm just going to use a password. And I'm going to set a simple password here. And then once you have all this selected here and you have your simple password defined, the rest of this for the most part doesn't really matter. Backups, if you're creating a production machine, it's a good idea to select backups. Private IP gives you the ability to allow servers to communicate one to the other without having to go out onto the public internet.
I will say, I don't know about Linode. I've never heard of it before, but I will say the interface is a lot better than AWS.
Personal favorite, Alex, would be Vultr. I would encourage you to check that out.
Very good.
But moving right along. So I'm going to go ahead and create this machine. Okay. Now, once you select your options, and forgive me, that's my password manager. Once you select your options, you're going to come to this screen. Now, before you do anything, it's important that you pay attention to the blinking yellow light. It says provisioning. Because you're going to hit create, and I see a lot of people do this all the time. They try to remote into the server right away. The second they hit create. No, server's not ready yet. It's not going to allow you to get in. Now, while this is provisioning, I want to show you the tool most commonly used okay.
Oh, the dangers of a demo.
Yes, I know. All right, so I want to show you the tool to for this case, I can also use the console. The tool most commonly used is PuTTY. Okay.
And what's PuTTY?
PuTTY is a executable, and I'm going to show you what that looks like here in 2 seconds. So PuTTY is an executable that you can download, and it allows you to telnet, SSH, or even use serial to communicate to different devices via command prompt. Most common thing we'll use here for Linux would be SSH. And I can't believe PuTTY is not working for me. I promise that I launched it 2 minutes before we started. But anyway, so now this is set up. There's several ways you can go into it. You can go into it via PuTTY. There's other tools out there that'll dial into it as well. Or you can also hit launch console here. And what the console will do when you launch the console is it takes you right to, it's like a KVM. It takes you right to the local screen as if you were physically sitting right in front of it. So the password we created when we set it up was root. So we're going to type in root. And you'll have to give it a second here because we used very low specs. All right. Yep, I thought I might have fat fingered that. Okay, once you log in, whether it be, I'm going to make this full screen, let everybody see it better. Oh, I guess that didn't help. Once you log into a Linux system, whether it be through SSH or through this console, you're going to get a screen that looks like this. And this is pretty much the startup screen. Now, this particular instance of Linux that I'm using is all command-based. There is no GUI interface in this case. There are versions of Linux that you can install that have a GUI interface, but the idea here is to keep the resources low, because the more you add GUI interfaces and stuff like that, the more resources it requires. So the next thing we want to do is we want to run updates on this Linux operating system to ensure that it is completely up to date with all the latest security, etc. Now, since I'm running as root and I already have root level permissions or administrative permissions, I don't need to include the word sudo. Sudo in Linux means run as administrator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in apt-get space update. And then I'm putting a -y after it, because if I don't put a -y after it, the system will constantly ask me on every update, are you sure? And by putting a -y, it just tells the system, yes, I'm sure, and it won't continually to prompt me. And then as you can see, when you're running the updates, you'll see all the updates go up your screen like the credits at the end of a movie.
And while we're doing that, let's go ahead and jump to a couple questions while it's doing its update. Bill, what do we got?
Sure. Okay. The first one comes from Jonas Tattel in Stuttgart, Germany, and he says, what's the best way to stream multiple channels to an Icecast server?
So multiple channels in the Icecast world, replace the word channels with mount points, okay? So each mount point on an Icecast server, on a single Icecast server, you can consider those separate streams, okay? And I'll get into more details as I move along here, but you can have several mount points on a server, and then those mount points can be tuned in individually, giving your channel effect. I will tell you, though, that it'll all come down to your player that you embed on your website, or your player that you give access to your listeners to. You have to enable a function on your player to be able to switch between the different streams easily. Now, you gotta remember, Icecast is not a player. It's a server. It's doing nothing but taking an audio input and then redistributing out. You have to have something to push the audio to the server, and you have to have something to play the server.
And what's the format that goes in, and what's the format that goes out of an Icecast server?
So the format that goes into an Icecast server is dictated by what's referred to as a streaming encoder. This is the piece of software that you use to push the audio to the server.
Now, it could also be like hardware as well, like a barracks could push that in.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It could be, there's a barracks, X-Streamer. There's multiple radio automation tools that have it built in. There's add-ons for several DAWs out there that you can do it with. So there's multiple resources in which you can push audio to it.
Right. Next, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Next question.
Well, with multiple channels, and so you could theoretically have a bunch of languages, right? You could have 8 languages going out, or it could be theoretically different music channels. Just it's all individual channels that are going to it.
Correct, and you don't have to have all those channels originating from the same place either. Right. I could, stream one thing to one channel, and Alex, you could stream the other thing, something else to another channel, and you're in California and I'm in Ohio. You don't necessarily have to be in the same place.
And it's just a matter of that you have to, on the Icecast server, set up different endpoints for it to go into, right?
Correct. So there's actually 2 ways you can do it. You can give everybody the master streaming password, and they can dictate whatever channel name they want in their streaming encoder, and it'll just show up on the server. Or,
right, but will it show up on the player? Does the player have to know what those channels are?
Yes, you do have to define the name in the player. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want,
is it possible? Like I don't know enough about audio streaming. I just know about video streaming. Is when the Icecast server is sending something to the player, is it sending a manifest that tells the player what it has, what's available to the player?
No, that has to be strictly dictated.
Got it. Okay, very good. Let's go back. We'll come back to more questions in a little bit, but let's go ahead and jump into a little bit more of the step-by-step.
Okay. So we created our server. We ran updates. So great. We have a fully updated server. Next, we're going to install Icecast. And thanks to the Linux community, they made this very simple for us. Okay. And what we're going to do, once again, we're going to type in apt-get, and then we're going to type in the word install, and then we're going to type in Icecast 2, and we're going to hit enter. And since I didn't put my -y like I did on updates, it's asking me to confirm. So I'm going to hit yes. And then next we're going to get this prompt. Now this prompt is asking me if I want to configure my Icecast. Now, two things with this. I would recommend, especially if it's your first time doing this, to go through these prompts to configure your Icecast. But in the event you accidentally hit no, it's okay, because I'm going to show you here in a minute where the config file is on the server and how to modify that. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and click yes. Okay, the first thing it's going to ask you is the host name. And honestly, for typically what I use this for, and if you're putting it in the cloud, the host name is not really relevant, unless it's only relevant is if you need to be able to see what things are on your network. Maybe you need to prioritize bandwidth or something like that, and you need to identify what the device is, then the host name's important. But if you're not doing something that fancy, honestly, the host name, you really don't have to change at all. So the Icecast secure password. So this is the master password that I was talking about, that just allows any streaming encoder to connect to a server at any mount point defined on the encoder, unless it's already in existence. So I'm going to make this one office hours, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, Icecast 2 relay password. So what this means is it's possible. So let's say we wanted to set up our own CDN. Okay, and I'm having lots of listeners tune in from all different parts of the country. So I put a server on the West Coast, I put a server in the central part of the country, and I put a server over in California, right? So what I can do is I pick one of those servers to be my master server, and that's where I'm sending my program feed to or my audio feed to, okay? And then the other two servers connect into that server and relay the audio out to the other servers, okay? Now, you have to strictly define in your website and in your player what server the player needs to connect to. And you can do this by coding on your website by determining geographical location. But, you know, if you're really expecting a large audience, doing multiple servers based on geographical area has always been, in my experience, the most success. So we're not going to use this for this demonstration, but I am going to set a password for it. I am going to set a password for it. I'm just going to call it office hours relay, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, the next is the administration password. So the administration password is used for the web interface of the Icecast server. Okay, it shows you http://localhost:8000. Okay, what this is going to translate into as we move down the road is it's going to be http:// the IP address of your server :8000, or whatever domain or subdomain that you've connected or associated with that IP address. So in this case, I'm going to make this password office hours, and I'm going to hit enter. Now what this is going to do is, this is essentially a wizard, and what the server just did is it created my config file for me, okay? And the config file is an XML file on the server, okay? The config file is located in etc Icecast 2 let's see, CD, forgot my 2 there.
This is always hard to do demos with Linux.
Yes.
It's always like a whole bunch of it's not as visual, and it's always like, oh, I typed the wrong thing. So yeah.
There we go. I didn't need my slash in this case. Okay, so ls is a list, and what the ls command does, it shows you what's in that folder. Okay, so what I did is I navigated from the root directory to the etc directory, and then to the Icecast 2 directory, and then I hit ls to show me what's in the folder. Okay, and then there are multiple text editors in Linux.
And do we have to adjust that XML? Is that something we have to open up as far as that goes?
You do not. You do not necessarily have to open it up.
Okay.
The only time you really have to open it up is if you want to get in the advanced stages. Right. So maybe you want to set specific passwords for specific mount points or channels.
Right.
Or maybe you're configuring a relay server or anything of that nature. I do want to open it up, Alex, in this case, because I want people to see what it looks like.
Okay. I'm mostly concerned about time, because we've got a bunch of questions stacking up. So I may have you, I'll probably ping you with questions, but otherwise I think we probably want to move faster to make sure we finish before the end of the hour.
Oh yeah, no problem. So just real quick, this is what it looks like. You know, it shows you the ports, etc. So let me minimize this and let me navigate to my newly created server. That's what the web page looks like.
So this is what we've built. So you built this this is sitting inside of Linode, and this is our Icecast, or your Icecast server that you just built.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Now, I am going to take this one step further. Okay. So, I'm logged into my radio station. What you're seeing on your screen right now is a processing software called Stereo Tool, but we're not going to use that. We're going to use an open source software that I like to use called BUTT, B-U-T-T. I'll put a link in the chat here in a little while. But it's an open source software. It can be used to push audio in various formats to both Icecast and Shoutcast. So I'm going to stop this here. No, I didn't take my radio station off the air. This is a separate feed that I use for testing. So don't worry. I did not take that off the air. So what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to quickly configure this to push audio to this server so you can see what it looks like once audio is pushed to it. So I'm going to click add, and then this is just a name. I can name it whatever I want.
And what's the functional difference between Shoutcast and Icecast? Like how are they processing it different? How are they processing the audio coming in differently? Do you know?
I don't know the exact technical answer to that question, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I do know that, I'm in the radio broadcasting industry, and I do know that Icecast has served the purpose a lot better, and a lot of professionals tend to lean towards it.
Right. And those are really the two big formats, right? There's not a lot of other, other options. If you want to do streaming with audio and build it yourself, it's really Icecast or Shoutcast, and most people have leaned towards Icecast.
Yes. Yes. Now, of course, there's always, you can always pick apart Icecast and do custom development work, but for the most part, just for the straight up simplicity of it, most go with Icecast. So in here, we're configuring Icecast. I'm simply going to type this IP address in here, which is 97.107.138.
And this is the IP address to your Icecast, right? So you're pointing this streamer to your Icecast server that's sitting on Linode.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, please note this can also be a URL. So if you connect this IP address to a domain or a subdomain, you can type that domain or subdomain in.
So you can have it be like Taylor's Icecast server, .com or whatever, or .live, and then just point it towards that.
live.officehours.global as an example.
Or it could be officehours.global/stream1. If we gave it something that, got it.
And in here is simply the network port we're using, which the most common one, which is this, you can change it, is 8,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then for here, I'm typing in the source password that we created at the start of the show. Now, the user field becomes more important when you strictly dictate who can connect to what mount point and use what mount point. The way I'm doing it, by using the source password, the user field doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. And then right here is where I can determine the name of the mount point or the name of the channel. Okay.
Right. But if it was a user, you could set it up so that it only could receive from a specific user, right?
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And then the password they enter would have to be the password associated with that user.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and click add and save. And then I'm going to click play. And now you can see it's connected. Now if I go back to my page here and I click refresh, there's my stream. Now, since I don't want us taken down on our broadcast, I'm not going to play any music because we will be taken down. But if I
wanted to play music, you just hit the M3U.
So there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can click the M3U, which will download an M3U file, which is a playlist file, and then you could play it in your favorite player. In Chrome, you can go up here to the web address, type in / and the name of the stream, and hit enter, and Chrome will just play it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or you can take this highlighted address here. And open up.
Something like VLC player. Yeah.
And
QuickTime should probably do that as well, right?
Yes. Any player that can play a network stream can do it just as well. So Alex, let's go ahead and proceed with questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump into the questions again. Bill?
Okay, I'll try to parse this correctly. Roy Myers in Bel Air, Maryland says using Apache with name-based virtual hosts and rewrites, and it looks like for HTTP, and he has a forward arrow symbol, so maybe migrating from HTTP to HTTPS for security. Think this is blocking Icecast. Can I make that situation play nice, or should I spin up a separate server specifically for Icecast?
So for reliability's sake, I never recommend putting both the web server and the streaming audio server on the same box. Because guess what? If one fails, both fail. So you never want to do that. Now, what I do recommend, though, and we've actually had this issue within office hours, by default, the Icecast server and the web interface and the URL is an unsecure URL. And most of the time, any modern website, the player on a modern website will have trouble playing that unsecure URL. What I do recommend, though, is setting up a web server on a separate web server on the Icecast box, and you would set up a method called a reverse proxy, and then you would set up a SSL certificate on that box, which will make your link secure. So when you embed it on your website hosted on a separate server, it'll play without issue.
Next question.
Jonas Dotel, Stuttgart, Germany. Is there anything new on the horizon on the audio streaming front?
Quality is picking up. The spatial audio, all the different stuff, the quality of it is picking up. And it's being used in several different ways. Now, the way I demonstrated today is specifically focused on live streaming. The on-demand stuff is a whole nother ball of wax. So this is specifically on live streaming content.
You go ahead, Courtney.
So does it stream just a stereo pair in MP3 format, or what format does it streaming as far as multi-channel goes, or is it just single channel?
So it does stream stereo pair. And once again, this is also an option that can be dictated in your streaming encoder when you send the audio to the server. It's also dictated in the codec you use or the format in which you send it. Some codecs are only strictly mono or single, and some will allow you to do two-channel. MP3 is most commonly the one used that I've seen, especially for most folks who are just experimenting with this, and that is two-channel, so it will send stereo across.
Does it support FLAC or lossless?
It does.
Orbis, something like that.
And can you do things like 5.1? Is there a way to get more channels in there?
I was told there is, and I've read research that there is, but I've not personally tried it.
Right. Next question.
Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia, says, I wanted to say thank you for the preview last night in After Hours, Taylor. It was great. So more comment.
That's good.
Well, the funny part about it is I intended to do more of a preview, but, we got such in-depth and a good conversation after hours that it really didn't happen.
Well, that's great.
The way I was intending.
And again, I think what we're planning to do is do a lab. So we'll all try to put together our own following along with Taylor in the next couple of weeks. So it should be a lot of fun. Next question.
Roy Myers in Bel Air, Maryland says, what's the best way to stream MP3s? Easy Stream docs indicate you need to specify bitrate and implies files should all be the same but have MP3s with mixed sample and bitrate. He has MP3s with mixed sample and bitrates. Or should I just convert everything to Ogg Vorbis using which tool?
So if you're streaming live, obviously any audio that goes through that encoder is all going to have the same bit rate and format. If you're doing on demand, you can do honestly any format you want. The trick is the player you're connecting the on demand content to, what format does that player support? So if you're posting an org file format to your CDN, but you don't have any players on your website or your app, etc., that support the play of that file, it's not going to help you. So you just want to be sure, primarily, specifically with the on-demand stuff, that whatever bit rate and format that you post the recording in, that the players support it.
Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Taylor, please share links for everything you're sharing today.
Will do. I'm going to get through the questions, and I'll be sure to post the links, and we'll be sure they're available to everybody.
Next question.
Eric Antonio in Washington, D.C. Are there server options that help make the stream findable by search engines, or is promoting the stream completely separate? Thanks.
So you really don't want you know how we were pulling up the Icecast website, so to speak, had the word Icecast 2 up top. You really don't want that known. Like, I have that address for office hours, but I'm not showing it to you because that reveals a public IP address, and that's kind of the back end or behind the scenes. What you really want to make known is your main website, whether it be the main website for your podcast or your internet radio station. That's what you want to make known. And then on that website, you will have a player to where people can listen to your stream. You don't really want your Icecast page to be known to the public or be found searchable. Now, granted, it is open and on the internet, and if somebody's clever enough or savvy enough, they probably could find it searching through source code, etc. But from a general point of view, that Icecast page is really a behind-the-scenes type thing.
How many people on that little server that you set up, how many people could connect at one time before it started to bog down?
On the little server I set up, you're assuming 120 bit rate. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to assume MP3
And are you limited?
format.
I guess the question is, are you limited by the CPU power or by the bandwidth that's available to that server?
The bandwidth. And the bandwidth in two respects. The bandwidth, the internet pipe itself, and the bandwidth of the network card on the server.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you have a gigabit internet, but the machine you're using only has a 10100 network card, you're only
does that little machine have the one that we set it up on? What's the bandwidth on that?
Gigabit.
A gigabit. So that would serve about it's about 8 per meg, right? So about 8,000 people.
Yes.
For a gig.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, Alex, after it goes above 2,000, I typically recommend creating relay servers and separating listeners out a little bit.
Now, how does a relay server work?
So a relay server simply is a single listener on your the relay server is nothing but a server who is
it doing load balancing?
Yeah, pretty much. It's listening to the audio on your main server and rebroadcasting it out to the listeners on the next server.
So, but is it like, so for instance, is it a relay server, I've got, it's coming in and am I sending it out to multiple Icecast servers? Is that how that's working?
Yes.
So it's going like this. And so it sends it out to those. And then but also when a user comes in, it's load balancing across those.
It can load balance across those, or you can do fancy coding on your website and direct the users to either one of those 5 you just drew.
Right. For some reason, like you could have some people that have more.
West Coast connects to this server, East Coast connects to that server. You know what I mean?
Right.
People in central part of the country connect to this server.
You could also have VIPs that always are going to get always on the same server or on the same 2 servers that everybody else gets kind of, if something goes wrong, there's a less chance that person's going to, that group is going to lose them.
Correct.
Yeah. Next question. Go ahead.
On that note, Alex, you can define in an Icecast server a failure point. So let's say, for example, we're streaming office hours, okay? And your primary encoder drops offline.
Yep.
Software freezes up, whatever the case may be. For redundancy, you would want to have 2 encoders running in 2 separate areas.
Right.
Okay. One at one mount point and one at the other. And you tell Icecast that if this mount point fails, if mount point A fails, move the listeners to mount point B.
Right.
So the listeners, they might experience about 5 or 10 seconds of buffering when that happens. And then all of a sudden the audio will come right back.
That's great. That's great. Next question.
Roy Myers in Bel Air, Maryland, up with this one. With regards to Alex's vision for an app to play an audio-only office hours stream, are there any open source cross-platform, and he specifies Android and iOS, projects that eat Icecast, which might make a good starting place to develop such an app?
My answer to that would be a web app, an HTML5 web app.
I mean, the problem we have with we have a web app now. Like that's what it is, and we find that it doesn't play, at least on iOS, doesn't play in the background well. That's the challenge that we have right now.
Yeah. Even to that, well, the one way, Alex, you might be able to solve it, and this is going to take some experimentation, is you could build a physical app that's simply a wrapper to the web app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And see if that will do it.
And people should do it. I know that some people have reached out to me about some other programming. If you're interested, reach out to me directly in Discord and we'll play with it a little bit. And we're looking for somebody in this case, I'm open to, people want to do React for Android, but I definitely want to write the iOS one natively because it's, I find React is painful.
Yeah. I'm not going to.
It's easy to write. It's easy to write, hard to use.
True. Now, I'm not going to name companies specifically, but there are companies out there that you can buy streaming services from that'll do a lot of this heavy lifting behind the scenes for you, as well as build an app for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I love about the idea is that we can keep on building what we're doing and then showing everybody what we did. Like as opposed to just, we got a service for it. Like, can we say, we're gonna eventually we will be building our own streaming, to our own player, even the video player. So that the audio player is a great preview of us just kind of showing how to do it. Because again, our goal is not just to do it for office hours, but to kind of create a path that other people can follow.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Next question.
Yeah, let's go to the next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama says bandwidth usage will grow when more users start streaming. Do you have details on how more users impact your Icecast server?
I think we kind of covered that.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say is you really have to pay attention to this if you are locally hosting your streaming server.
Right.
Because especially if you're doing it from your house, the more people that connect to it, the more of your upload bandwidth is going to be eaten up.
Right.
So it's really something the bandwidth is really something you got to pay super close attention to if you locally host it. And then of course, if you're on a budget, you really got to pay attention to what the bandwidth costs are if you put it in the cloud somewhere.
Yeah, because if you start getting to a point where you're moving 5 or 6 gigs, it's not a huge number by itself, but 5 or 6 gigs a second is going to start getting you into, $10, $15 an hour, which, eventually starts to add up to real money. So
yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I'm not a legal advisor, but I will tell you is be careful on streaming copyrighted material without proper licensing.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Paul Buchan says, and from Columbus, Ohio, how low can you get the latency in a system?
The lowest I've gotten it was about 2 seconds, but that's at an extremely high bit rate. Now, because it's network, there's always going to be some latency. You'll get it to the point where it'll be less and less noticeable, but there's always going to be some there. For my station specifically, I stream at 128 bits on an MP3 format, and it's roughly a 10 to 15 second delay.
Next question.
Courtney Gooden in Hollywood here on the panel says, what are you using for your radio station player or playlist manager?
Go ahead, Courtney. Do you want to elaborate on that question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you use a specific custom piece of software to organize your playlist and automate your playlist that's going up to the server? And can that pull material off your hard drive in a variety of formats? It doesn't matter there because it's all then encoded to 128-bit MP3 before it goes up?
Yes. I use a piece of software called Station Playlist. And I'm going to share my screen once again real quick. So if you'll cut to my screen real quick, you'll see it up here. So this is the playout software I use. It's called Station Playlist. I run an 80s format station. It's a low power FM community station. And this is the playlist. This particular suite you can buy. It comes with software to generate the playlist. And then you can put things into the playlist that this software will abide by or execute. You can put different commands for it to do. You also, in developing the playlist, you can let the system do it, and then you can essentially give it do's and don'ts. Don't play the same artist don't play two songs by the same artist right next to each other.
So you're not building you're not building a true playlist. You're building a set of rules by grab this library and build the playlist from it. So it's dynamically building that based on the rules that you set.
Yeah, honestly, Alex, you can do either one. In this case, I do it dynamically. I set rules, and it puts it together for me.
And can it do a little bit of both? Like in this section, it's going to be a hard playlist, and then in this section, we're going to do wildcard.
Sure
great.
can.
It's really cool.
And does it crossfade between pieces, or does it? Can you control that?
So you can go in. You can go into the playlist and dictate when it crossfades. Most commonly, what you do is you set a dB level, and once the audio of the current element that's playing or the song that's playing, once that song audio drops below a certain dB level, it fires the next element.
It's great. If anyone has any final questions, let us know. But I think that has been a great coverage of it. Really excited. It's one of those things that for a while, like Icecast, it's been around for what, 20 years? Has it been around for 20 years?
Roughly, yeah.
And so it's been around for a long time. This isn't a brand new thing, but it always was kind of a mystery. We did Icecast stuff with Pixel Core early on, but it was just kind of like, I just did it. And we did it from literally a local server. just like we just turned it on. There was a Mac program, I think, that did this. That was, I can't remember what it might have been called. I thought it was called Icecast, but it was something like that. And you just push the button and it would start streaming out and you'd send people an address. But of course, we weren't only doing it to a couple hundred people. It's amazing now. And I guess, it's amazing. And a lot of people use it. I mean, this is the platform, right? If you're going to do a stream with audio at the moment on your own, Icecast is the way to go, right? Right, Taylor?
Yeah, absolutely. We use it for the back end here at Office Hours.
Right.
Leo uses it for Twit. So if you listen to the audio only stream of Twit,
right?
I know without naming other broadcast companies, I know a few broadcast companies who also use it. So, of course, they have developers that tweak it and modify it a little bit for their needs, but
is it open source completely?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Taylor, thank you so much for the time. I know that probably took a long time to get set up. So we really appreciate the work that you put into the presentation.
Oh, yeah, no problem. My pleasure. And guys, if I didn't get to your question now and you have a burning desire to get a question answered, you can catch me after hours or on the Discord.
Absolutely. And again, we are going to work with Taylor on doing a very specific after hours lab. It doesn't look like watching Taylor go through it. I think that if we did a 2-hour lab with some Q&A, we'd probably be able to, probably 1 hour, but we'll just be conservative. If we carve out a 2-hour block, I think we'd be able to all build our own Icecast servers. So it'd be kind of fun for us to know how to do it. I think that the reason that I wanted Taylor to come on is that it's a very underutilized service, is that there's a lot of people that just want to listen to it in the background, and being able to provide that is something that could be really interesting. So we're going to spend a lot more time. And what we try to do in office hours is we have one person that knows how to do it, or a couple people probably in this group. Let's get 50 that know how to do it, because once we have 50, we can start trading notes, and figuring stuff out and starting to innovate. So, anyway, thanks again, Taylor, for coming in and hanging out with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me, and we'll continue to move forward.
Absolutely. All right. And thank you to our producers for the great questions. We went through a lot of them. Well done. And thanks to the panel who keeps on getting better at answering those questions. Can't do this without you. Really, really well done. And we'll now jump in. Remember tomorrow, we are talking about animation. And right now we are going to jump into After Hours. All right, see you there.